Good evening, my stoic knights. Have you ever heard of the tale of a samurai with a gun? Sounds crazy, right? Well, today we're going to be exploring something a little different and interesting today. So sit back and relax as we embark on this extraordinary tale together, and don't forget to like and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And with that being said, let's go.
The scent of loam and pine filled the morning air, still wet with dew. Kaito Masanobu stood alone on the hardened earth of the Akizuki training yard, the dull clack of his wooden sword echoing across the cold stone walls. Mist clung to the grounds like a breath half exhaled, drifting low and silent over the cracked dirt and frostbitten grass. The only sounds were the snap of his sleeves and the sharp inhale before each strike. His bakken came down in a wide arc, splitting the mist before colliding with the straw dummy. The impact jarred his wrists, but he did not flinch. Again. Another strike, this time from the left shoulder. Again. A thrust. Step back. Reset. The rhythm was as familiar as breath, yet it never grew effortless. The training dummy, wrapped in frayed rice rope and punctured with scars, gave no resistance, no reaction. It was the perfect opponent, unflinching, unpitying, silent. Masanobu's breaths came short now, and sweat clung to his temple despite the chill. The bakken's weight had vanished from his awareness. It was no longer a tool, it was a limb. His mind emptied as his body moved. Every strike was a meditation. Every angle, an offering. For Masanobu, the sword had never been just a weapon. It was meaning. It was lineage. It was himself. Then, from the edge of the courtyard, a soft cough, barely audible, but sharper than a blade. Masanobu froze mid-motion. "You overextend on the third cut," came a voice like gravel wrapped in silk. "Your balance leans too far forward." Masanobu turned and immediately bowed low. His father, Kaito Nobutaka, stepped into view, arms folded, a long indigo cloak trailing behind him like a brushstroke of ink. The man had aged like mountain stone, no sudden change, just slow erosion of softness, replaced by harder edges. "Father," Masanobu said, straightening. "I train for speed. Speed without control is as dangerous to you as to your enemy." Nobutaka's gaze flicked toward the dummy. "You seek perfection, but the blade doesn't ask for perfection. Only truth." He walked toward his son, stopping a pace away. "What is a sword, Masanobu?" Masanobu answered instinctively. "The extension of one's will. The soul of the samurai." Nobutaka's expression didn't change. "Good. But the world no longer believes in souls, boy. It believes in ships that spew smoke and men who kill from across the field without ever drawing steel." Masanobu flinched slightly. "I am not afraid of the black ships. You should not be. Fear is for men who have no convictions." Nobutaka studied his son's face. "But do not mistake conviction for strength. Steel does not stop gunpowder." He reached down and picked up Masanobu's bakken, turning it in his hands. "Your grip is sound. But your mind is still rigid." His voice softened just slightly. "The sword may be your soul, but the soul must bend, or it will break." They stood in silence. A crow cried overhead. Finally, Nobutaka handed the bakken back. "Train until the sun touches the eastern watchtower. Then come to the main hall. Lord Akizuki has summoned the senior retainers. You'll observe." Masanobu bowed deeply again. "Hi, father." As his father's footsteps faded beyond the gate, Masanobu looked down at the wooden sword in his hands. It was worn from years of use, polished by sweat, stained by blood, and scarred by countless errors. It had once belonged to his older brother before sickness claimed him at 16. Now, It was his. And in his grip, it felt alive. Still, his father's words echoed like wind in an empty dojo. Steel does not stop gunpowder. He turned back to the straw dummy, this time striking not from habit, but from reflection. Each cut was slower now, more thoughtful. He adjusted his footing, shifted his center. The mist began to lift, and with it, a creeping awareness. The world outside these walls was changing. Faster than he could train. Faster than he could understand. By late morning, Masanobu stood outside the main hall of Akizuki Castle, his hakama neat, his hair tied tightly back, the scent of cedar smoke and parchment lingering in the air. Inside, voices rose and fell like a distant storm. He waited as was proper, still, quiet, and invisible. Then a page slid open the door. "You may enter." Masanobu stepped into the room and bowed low, kneeling beside the wall. He dared not look directly at the gathered men but listened intently. Around the central table sat the senior retainers of the Akizuki clan, gray-haired men with sharp eyes and folded arms, some warriors, others scholars. His father stood among them, his presence like a sword in its sheath, calm, but potentially lethal. Lord Akizuki himself sat at the head of the room, still youthful for a daimyo, but with the weight of modern times hollowing his gaze. He held a scroll in his hand, unrolled halfway. "The shogun has signed the Treaty of Amity and Commerce with the Americans," he said flatly. "Edo has bowed. The ports will open." Murmurs filled the chamber. "They demand extraterritoriality," one retainer growled. "Foreigners, immune to our laws, walking our streets with impunity?" "They will walk," Lord Akizuki said. "And they will trade. We have no choice." "Then we fight," said another. "Sano joy. Revere the emperor, expel the barbarians." Masanobu felt his chest tighten. His father raised a hand. "And what will we fight them with, Takeda Dano? Matchlocks that misfire in the rain? Bows that cannot reach their ships? Will we send our sons with swords against iron hulls and repeating rifles?" Silence. Akizuki's gaze drifted to the window. "The world has changed. We can either pretend it has not, or we prepare our domain to survive it." That night, Masanobu sat alone in the castle garden, a small oil lamp casting flickering shadows on his lap. He held his katana across his knees, unsheathed, its steel catching the light like water. He stared into the blade, and for the first time in his life, he saw not strength, but fragility. The weapon he loved, the art he had mastered, the legacy he carried, what place did they have in a world ruled by steam and gunpowder? From behind, a voice interrupted the stillness. "You looked like your brother just now." Masanobu turned. His mother stood beneath the cherry tree, its leaves already tinged with autumn red. "Lost," she said. "And proud of it." He smiled faintly. "Is that a compliment?" "It is a truth." She stepped closer. "Your father, he carries the burden of both past and future. You carry it too. But he has learned how to let go of one without discarding the other. Can you?" Masanobu looked down at the blade once more. Then slowly, he slid it back into its scabbard. "I don't know," he whispered. The rain had begun at dawn, soft at first, then steadily rising to a steady, slanted curtain that turned the mountain road into a glistening ribbon of mud and loose gravel. The kind of rain that seeped into your bones. Masanobu rode near the front of the procession, his back straight despite the damp, the cold, and the heavy armor weighing on his shoulders like guilt. Behind him, 24 mounted Akizuki retainers rode in grim silence. Their banners were wrapped tightly against the wind, their faces half hidden beneath jingaisa hats or straw hoods. The smell of wet leather, horse sweat, and steel was thick in the air. They were hunting Ronin, masterless samurai turned highwaymen, men driven to desperation by the same tide of change that threatened to drown them all. Banditry had grown rampant in the southern provinces as former warriors found themselves without stipends, their honor replaced by hunger. Their target was a group rumored to be hiding in a ravine ahead, former retainers of a neighboring domain that had refused to modernize and been forcibly dissolved. Now they carved out a bitter existence by preying on merchants and imperial convoys. Masanobu had no illusions. They were not cowards. They were remnants. Dangerous, angry remnants. He gripped his reins tighter, his other hand resting on the hilt of his katana. At his side, a newly issued Smith & Wesson Model 2 revolver sat holstered under his rain-slick cloak. It still felt foreign, too light, too crude, but he had been ordered to carry it. And he obeyed orders. Beside him rode Captain Kurata, an older retainer with one eye and a permanent scowl. Kurata had once served alongside Masanobu's father, and though his loyalty was unquestionable, his bitterness toward the new order simmered beneath every word. "You ever shoot that thing?" Kurata asked, nodding at the revolver. "Only in training." Kurata spat rainwater. "Hope you remember which end kills." Ahead, the path curved sharply and dipped into a wooded gully. Masanobu raised a fist, halting the column. Birds scattered from the trees. The air was suddenly too still. "Dismount," he ordered. The men moved quickly and quietly, weapons drawn. Masanobu unsheathed his katana and held it low, stepping forward through the wet underbrush, his senses taut. The ravine was narrow, its walls steep. A perfect place for an ambush. "Fan out." 5-pace spread, he whispered. They moved forward in a line, boots squelching in the mud. Raindrops drummed on the lacquered armor, masking the smaller sounds. Masanobu's heart beat slow and steady, until the first shot cracked through the forest like a thunderclap. One of the men cried out and fell, blood mixing with the rain. Down! Musket fire erupted from the ridgeline, flashes of light punctuating the gloom. The Akizuki men dove for cover behind trees and rocks, arrows hissing in the confusion, some old-fashioned, some newer mini-rifles. The enemy had mixed weaponry but a clear advantage in elevation. Masanobu crawled to the base of a pine and scanned the ridge. He saw them then, dirty, ragged men in rusted armor, crouched behind roots and stone, firing methodically. Their faces were not masked. They wanted to be seen. Wanted the world to know they hadn't vanished. Kurata cursed beside him. "Fools have real guns. They're not just bandits, they're soldiers." "Former soldiers," Masanobu corrected. "They still fight like samurai." Kurata grinned bitterly. "No. They fight like ghosts." Masanobu made a decision. "Kurata, suppress their right flank. I'll lead the left up the ridge." Kurata nodded. "Hope your revolver's louder than your ideals." Masanobu drew the pistol. It felt awkward in his hand, the grip too smooth, the balance strange. But when he fired into the ridge, once, twice, it answered with a roar. The recoil shocked him. One of the figures on the ridge jerked and vanished behind a tree. His men surged forward behind him, and for the first time in his life, Masanobu led a charge not with his katana, but with smoke and fire. The climb was treacherous, but the rain worked both ways, slippery for defenders, too. By the time Masanobu crested the ridge, 2 of his men had fallen, but the line held. He raised his sword just in time to parry a downward slash. The Ronin was gaunt, eyes sunken with hunger, but his blade moved like lightning. Masanobu ducked the next strike, stepped inside, and countered with a thrust that drove through the man's chest. The Ronin gasped, less in pain than in surprise, and fell backward into the mud. Around him, blades clashed in sudden, brutal intimacy. Gunfire had opened the battle, but swords would finish it. By the time the skirmish ended, the forest was filled with steam and silence. The last of the Ronin fled into the fog, leaving their dead behind. Masanobu stood with blood on his hands, his breath ragged, his revolver empty, and his sword notched but unbroken. That evening, back in camp, Masanobu sat beneath a canvas lean-to, watching rainwater drip from the edge. The fire crackled low. Kurata approached, tossing down a blanket. "First time's always worst," he muttered. Masanobu didn't answer. Kurata looked at him. "You fought well. Led well." Masanobu finally spoke. "That man I killed on the ridge, he bowed to me before he struck." Kurata raised an eyebrow. "And?" "I almost bowed back." Kurata stared into the fire. "We're in a world now where bows mean nothing. A man can be cut down from 100 paces. You bowed, and he'd have shot you if he had the powder." Masanobu looked down at the revolver lying across his lap. "Then what are we, Kurata-san?" The older man didn't answer. Instead, he leaned back, closed his eyes, and let the sound of the rain speak for him. The corridors of Akizuki Castle were quiet when Masanobu returned, though silence here was never still. It hummed in the floorboards, whispered behind paper walls, lingered between the servants' lowered eyes and the guards' unreadable expressions. It was the silence of a country holding its breath. He walked slowly, helmet under one arm, his armor still damp from the road. Rainwater and blood had dried together on the sleeves of his kimono, forming dark stains beneath the lacquered plates. He had refused rest. He had refused tea. He had gone straight to the audience hall. Lord Akizuki sat waiting, hands folded in his lap, his face a mask carved from patience. His hair, immaculately combed, framed a brow lined with quiet calculation. Beside him stood Masanobu's father, Nobutaka, unreadable as always. The chamber was otherwise empty, the screens closed tight. No advisors. No scribes. Just the three of them, and the weight of the modern age hanging heavy in the air. Masanobu knelt and bowed deeply. "My lord." The Ronin were routed. 12 dead, 4 captured. "We lost 5. 5, Lord Akizuki echoed. "More than I would wish. They had rifles. Good ones. Imported. They fought with discipline. Were they trained soldiers?" Masanobu hesitated. "They fought like men with nothing to lose." Lord Akizuki leaned back, fingers tapping once on the armrest. "And you? What did you lose?" Masanobu looked up. "A piece of something I believed was permanent." The Lord's gaze lingered on him. "That is a necessary wound." Nobutaka stepped forward, unrolling a scroll. "We've received word from Satsuma. Their men train openly now with foreign instructors. English, French. Some of their officers speak both languages fluently. They drill in line formations. Load rifled muskets. Carry pistols." He looked at his son. "Soon, battles will not be decided by swordsmanship, but by supply chains." Masanobu clenched his fists. "So we become them? Is that the way of the samurai now? Trade blades for drills and uniforms?" "No," Nobutaka said calmly. "We learn from them. We do not become them." Lord Akizuki interjected. "And that, Masanobu, is why I am sending you to Nagasaki." Masanobu blinked. "My lord? You will serve as an observer with the foreign garrison stationed near the harbor. The Dutch and Americans are both establishing outposts. You will report on their tactics, their weapons, their habits. Learn their strengths. And their weaknesses. It felt like a punishment. An exile. I would serve you better with a sword. Lord Akizuki smiled faintly. No. You will serve me better with your eyes. With your mind. And if need be, with your gun. Masanobu bowed again, lower this time, though something inside him buckled. He was being sent into the mouth of the beast. The journey to Nagasaki took a week by horseback and ship. The port was unlike any place he had seen, wooden warehouses stacked high with barrels, foreign ships moored in tight rows, flags snapping in the wind like the banners of an invading army. Sailors of every color and language shouted orders, laughed, smoked strange herbs. Even the air smelled different, salt and oil, iron and tobacco. Masanobu was escorted to a low building near the edge of the foreign quarter. Inside waited a man with a red beard and spectacles, dressed in a drab gray coat. He stood the way officers do, like a sword that never left its scabbard. "Lieutenant James Hawthorne," he said, offering a hand. "I've been told you're here to observe." Masanobu bowed instead of shaking. "Kaito Masanobu. Of Akizuki." Hawthorne nodded, not offended. "We'll begin at 0700 tomorrow. Training fields behind the battery wall. You'll see things that may feel undignified to your warrior code. Try to keep an open mind." "I will keep a sharp one," Masanobu replied. The drills were unlike anything Masanobu had trained in. Soldiers moved in ranks, not as individuals but as cogs in a machine. They practiced reloading in unison, marching, pivoting, and firing in volleys. There was no elegance. No grace. But the efficiency was undeniable. He watched as a dozen soldiers fired their rifles in formation. 6 men, 6 shots, 6 targets felled in under 10 seconds. Then another row stepped forward to repeat the process while the first reloaded. Continuous fire. Controlled chaos. "Discipline is our sword," Hawthorne said, approaching him. "Courage helps, but it doesn't stop a bullet." Masanobu studied the rifles, long, ugly things with fixed bayonets and polished stocks. They kill at distance. But in close combat. In close combat, Hawthorne interrupted, someone has already made a mistake. That night, Masanobu sat on a low bench near the docks, watching lanterns sway on the water. His katana lay across his knees. Beside it, the revolver gleamed like a foreign omen. He didn't touch either. Not yet. He listened to the sailors laughing. To the distant sounds of hammers building new structures in the foreign quarter. The language was strange, but the intention was clear. They were here to stay. A Japanese boy passed nearby, barefoot and wide-eyed, carrying coal for the steamship. He paused to look at Masanobu's sword, then pointed to the revolver. "Will that replace the blade?" he asked, innocent. Masanobu looked at him for a long moment, then said, "Only if we let it." The boy nodded and ran off. Masanobu remained seated, staring into the harbor where the sea reflected nothing but foreign lights. The smell of coal lingered everywhere in Nagasaki, clinging to the sails, the streets, the sweat of men who shoveled fuel into the iron stomachs of steamships. Masanobu hated it. It masked the clean scent of the sea and left a layer of grime on the skin. Even his armor, stored carefully in a lacquered trunk, had begun to lose its luster under the constant assault of ash. 2 weeks into his assignment, he had filled several scrolls with detailed observations, formations, firing drills, mechanical breakdowns of artillery pieces, the daily schedules of garrisons. He watched them eat, march, drink, train. And still, he felt no closer to understanding them. They did not train in the rain. They slept late when hungover. They let soldiers speak back to officers. It was a world built on contracts and rules, not honor and obedience. But they were not weak. That made them dangerous. Lieutenant Hawthorne had taken a liking to him in a distant, guarded way. They walked together along the battery wall some evenings, Masanobu in his dark kimono, Hawthorne in woolen uniform, both men wrapped in silence and suspicion. "You write a lot," Hawthorne remarked one night. "What do you tell your lords about us?" "I write only what I see," Masanobu replied. "That's dangerous," the foreigner said with a smile. "Seeing too much." Masanobu did not smile back. That evening, he returned to his quarters and found a letter waiting for him, sealed in black lacquer. It bore no crest, but he recognized the handwriting. His father's. Masanobu. Return to the Akizuki estate at once. Travel discreetly. Do not speak of this letter. There is a traitor within our ranks. He is believed to be supplying Satsuma with information about our alliance with the Imperial faction. We fear the blow will come from within. No signature. No instructions beyond the warning. Just his father's stoic brushstrokes and the weight of implication. Masanobu did not sleep that night. He paced his quarters, glancing between his sword and his revolver. Which did he trust more now? By morning, he had made arrangements to leave the foreign quarter. Under the pretense of delivering his scrolls to a courier, he slipped out of Nagasaki before noon, dressed as a merchant retainer and traveling light. It was a 2-day ride to the Akizuki mountain compound. He took back roads, avoiding the toll stations manned by Bakufu agents, watching the forests for movement. The political winds were shifting violently now, emperor loyalists on one side, shogunate enforcers on the other, and men like Masanobu caught in the middle. When he reached the compound, his father was waiting. Nobutaka met him at the edge of the outer courtyard, flanked by 2 retainers. His expression gave nothing away. "You came quickly," he said. "Your letter was brief," Masanobu replied. "Follow me." They walked in silence to the inner chamber, where a map of the Kyushu region had been spread across a low table. Colored markers indicated troop movements. Red for the Satsuma. Blue for Imperial. White for uncertain domains, many of which were no longer uncertain. "We intercepted a message 2 days ago," Nobutaka said, placing a folded note in Masanobu's hands. "It confirms what we suspected. Someone within our house is feeding information to a Satsuma liaison operating under merchant cover." Masanobu scanned the note. It was coded, but decipherable. Names, schedules, troop positions. The leak had been ongoing for months. "Who?" "We do not know yet," Nobutaka said. "But we have narrowed it to 3 retainers, all men of rank. All men who fought beside me for years. One of them was seen meeting a traitor 2 nights ago near the western gate." Masanobu stared at the map. "And you want me to find him?" "No," Nobutaka said. "I want you to test them." That night, Masanobu dined with the 3 suspects, retainers Sato, Ichikawa, and Minnow. All were seasoned warriors, older than Masanobu, and each had mentored him at one point during his youth. They spoke respectfully, drank tea, and traded old battlefield stories. But Masanobu had planted a lie earlier that day. A whispered rumor about a new shipment of foreign rifles arriving from Nagasaki. A decoy. A trap. By morning, the rumor had reached ears it shouldn't have. Ichikawa disappeared that afternoon. Masanobu followed him. He kept his distance through the bamboo groves beyond the castle, where the mist thickened and paths narrowed. Ichikawa moved quickly, but not stealthily. He knew the land too well to be cautious. He carried no sword, only a satchel. Masanobu confronted him in a clearing. "Ichikawa Dano," he called out. The man froze. Turned slowly. "Ah. Masanobu-kun," he said. "Didn't expect you here. You're carrying messages." "I'm carrying peace." Masanobu stepped closer. "Peace doesn't flee through the woods." Ichikawa exhaled. Satsuma offered hope. "They train their men. Feed their people. The shogunate is a corpse walking, and the emperor is just a boy manipulated by hungry men. I did what I had to do to preserve our house. You sold us. I saved us. You'll see. When the tide turns, we will be on the right side." Masanobu drew his pistol. Ichikawa didn't flinch. "Will you shoot me like a foreigner, Masanobu-kun? Is that who you've become?" The accusation struck deeper than the barrel's recoil ever could. "I serve Akizuki," Masanobu said. Ichikawa nodded sadly. "So do I. Just in a way the old men will never understand." Masanobu lowered the weapon. "Go," he said. "I'll tell them you never came back." Ichikawa bowed. "Your father would have executed me." "I'm not my father." The older man vanished into the trees. That night, Masanobu reported to Nobutaka. "He is dead," Masanobu said simply. His father studied him. "Were you seen?" "No." There was a long silence. Then Nobutaka nodded. "Sometimes, mercy must look like justice." Masanobu bowed. But the word sat like poison in his gut. The sea air that once seemed sharp and invigorating now smelled sour to Masanobu as he stepped off the transport skiff and back onto the docks of Nagasaki. It had only been 2 weeks since he departed, but the city had transformed. There were more guards, more cannon emplacements along the coastal walls, and noticeably fewer merchants walking the muddy streets. Tension coiled through the harbor like rope pulled taut. The foreign quarter, once bustling with idle chatter and the sound of ship bells, now moved with quiet urgency. British and American naval officers spoke in hushed tones. Japanese porters hurried past with lowered eyes. Everyone seemed to expect something. Lieutenant Hawthorne met him at the southern gate, his uniform more rumpled than usual, his jaw lined with stubble. "You chose an interesting time to return," he said without preamble. Masanobu bowed politely. "I left under orders. And now you're back under storm clouds." Hawthorne turned and led him through the narrow alleys of the compound. The Satsuma and Chashu domains have declared themselves openly in favor of imperial restoration. The shogun has mobilized. Everyone with a rifle is choosing a side. And which side are the foreigners on? Hawthorne gave him a sideways glance. "The one with the most trade rights when the dust settles." Masanobu understood. The foreigners would not fight for Japan, but they would sell weapons to whoever paid best. They arrived at the barracks courtyard where foreign and Japanese troops now trained side by side. The contrast was jarring, samurai in Haori jackets drilling alongside peasants in drab conscript uniforms, some holding bayonets awkwardly, others trying to follow barked English orders with only partial translation. A young Japanese soldier tripped during formation. His rifle discharged into the ground. The officers nearby didn't shout. They laughed. One of the Western sergeants barked something Masanobu didn't catch, but the tone was clear: contempt. Masanobu's hand itched toward the hilt of his sword, but he did not move. "That man is from Chikuzen," Hawthorne said, noticing. "He was a farmer last year. Now he's a soldier. And in 6 months, he'll be in the front lines outside Kyoto, whether he's ready or not." Masanobu frowned. Does he even know what he fights for? Does it matter? That night, Masanobu found himself standing outside the harbor warehouse used for arms storage. Inside, crates stamped with foreign characters sat neatly stacked beside newer ones bearing the imperial crest. Rifles, cartridges, pistols, more than Masanobu had ever seen in one place. He stared at them for a long time, running his fingers along the cold metal of a Spencer repeating rifle. "They have no soul," he whispered. But that wasn't entirely true. They did. They had the soul of inevitability. 3 days later, an imperial courier arrived at the Akizuki embassy in Nagasaki. Masanobu was summoned to a small meeting room where Lord Akizuki's cousin, Aimasa, waited with a sealed dispatch. "The Satsuma and Chashu forces have moved on Tobafushimi," Aimasa said, his voice low. "The shogun's troops are routed. The imperial banner flies over Kyoto." Masanobu's breath caught. "Then the war has begun." "It has," Aimasa replied grimly. "And Akizuki must now choose, pledge ourselves fully to the emperor, or risk being branded traitors." "We already made that choice." Aimasa nodded. "Then prepare. You'll return to the domain with weapons and intelligence. You'll command a new unit, one trained in foreign tactics. Selected by Lord Akizuki himself." Masanobu stared. "You would give a peasant rifle to a samurai?" "I would give a plow to a soldier if it won the harvest," Aimasa said. "We fight for survival now, Masanobu. Pride comes later." By early spring, Masanobu was back in Akizuki. He stood on the newly cleared parade ground outside the castle, watching a line of 30 recruits stumble through their first coordinated volley. Some were samurai. Most were farmers. A few had never held anything deadlier than a sickle. Kurata stood beside him, arms folded, a grimace on his face. "We were once feared across Kyushu for our blade work," the old captain muttered. "Now we train peasants to shoot straight." "And yet," Masanobu said, "they learn quickly." Kurata spat. "A gun doesn't make a soldier. It makes a killer." Masanobu turned to him. "Is there a difference now?" Kurata said nothing. That night, Masanobu sat alone in the dojo. The floor smelled of oil and old sweat. His sword lay unsheathed before him. In the flickering candlelight, he polished the blade with practiced movements: rice paper, oil, cloth, repeat. He remembered his brother, lost to fever. His first duel, a draw. The way his father had once told him that a sword, like a man, must bend or break. He now bent. And yet he broke. In the courtyard, rifles were stacked neatly beside the armor racks. The old and new, resting side by side. He looked up at the fading scroll hanging on the dojo wall. Loyalty before life. Duty before glory. He closed his eyes. Soon, that would be tested more severely than he could yet imagine. It began in smoke. Thick, black smoke rising from the village of Iwamuro, a sleepy settlement nestled between the southern hills. Masanobu could smell it before they even crested the ridge. It wasn't the acrid burn of dry brush or the clean scent of cooking fires. This was war smoke, a mixture of scorched thatch, spilled powder, and blood. His unit moved quietly down the slope, 30 men in mismatched uniforms, half wore remnants of traditional samurai armor, the other half dressed in plain tunics and breeches dyed imperial brown. Each bore a rifle. Most were old Enfields, single-shot muzzle loaders, though a few, including Masanobu's, were newer breech loaders. All were loaded. All were ready. Kurata rode beside him, his armor worn proudly despite the mud clinging to its plates. Scout reports say it's Satsuma irregulars. Maybe 20. Looters, not a proper detachment. That doesn't make them less dangerous, Masanobu said. Cornered men kill more fiercely. Kurata grunted. I trust my sword more than these peasants and their rifles. Masanobu didn't answer. He had learned, in the weeks since forming the new Akizuki detachment, that Kurata represented more than just a voice of tradition. He was the resentment of an entire class, displaced by change and yet still expected to lead its charge. At the edge of the village, they stopped. Smoke drifted like ghosts through the half-burned gates. Inside, homes lay shattered, livestock scattered, and bodies slumped over doorways. Women wailed behind shuttered houses. A cart smoldered in the square. Masanobu raised a fist. Fan out. Secure the perimeter. Check the wells. He and 6 riflemen moved into the main road, their boots crunching on broken pottery and shattered roof tiles. A child's doll lay in the dirt, its face cracked, one eye missing. They found the Satsuma rebels in the sake storehouse. Gunfire erupted the moment Masanobu stepped around the corner, 2 loud cracks, and one of his men collapsed with a cry. The rest dove for cover. Hold fire. Masanobu yelled. Surround the building. Don't rush it. Kurata appeared behind him, katana drawn. We should charge. We should think, Masanobu hissed. They want us to. He crawled to the edge of the wall and shouted. This is Captain Kaito Masanobu of the Akizuki domain, aligned with the imperial cause. Lay down your arms and we will spare you. For a moment, there was silence. Then a hoarse voice from within. We are samurai. You offer mercy like a merchant. Masanobu's jaw tightened. You burn villages. Slaughter peasants. What honor do you claim? A shot answered him. It missed, but the message was clear. Kurata leaned close. Orders. Masanobu looked at his men, young, untested, afraid. And then at the rebels, trapped, doomed, and still defiant. Set fire to the thatch roof. Kurata blinked. You would smoke them out? I would spare my men. Do it. The roof caught quickly, dry straw igniting with the speed of a summer spark. Smoke billowed into the air. Coughs and shouts rose from within. Then came a crash as the side door burst open and 5 rebels spilled out, blades drawn. Masanobu's men faltered. 2 dropped their rifles. 1 fired wildly into the sky. The rebels closed in, screaming, slashing, unstoppable. Masanobu surged forward, katana flashing. He parried the first blow, pivoted, and cut through his attacker's side in a smooth arc. Another rebel charged, but Kurata met him head-on, shouting a guttural war cry as their swords collided. Gunshots rang out behind them, sharp, staggered reports as Masanobu's men regained their footing. 1 rebel fell, then another. By the time the smoke cleared, 5 Satsuma lay in the mud. 1 remained alive, kneeling near the well, blood soaking his sleeve. Masanobu approached him slowly, blade lowered. The rebel looked up, no fear in his eyes. You would kill a samurai begging for an honorable death? You were burning rice granaries. To deny the emperor's armies, he spat. We fight for Japan. Not for merchants with rifles. Masanobu knelt before him. We fight for the people who can't defend themselves. You once swore to protect them. What happened to that oath? The rebel coughed, blood spattering his chin. It died with our country. Masanobu nodded slowly, then drew his wakizashi and offered it. The rebel's eyes widened. I will honor your death, Masanobu said. But you must carry the weight of your choices. The man gripped the short blade with trembling hands. He bowed once, and then, with steady grace, ended his life. That night, as the village slept in uneasy silence, Masanobu stood watch at the gate. His armor was stained, his blade uncleaned, his soul heavier than ever. Kurata joined him after midnight, a flask of rice wine in hand. "We did what had to be done," he said. Masanobu looked out over the dark hills. "So they say. You gave that man an honorable end. I wonder if that still means anything." Kurata was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I used to think the samurai were guardians of honor. But maybe we were just guardians of a dream. One that's dying." Masanobu looked down at his hands, calloused, bloodied, still shaking slightly. "Then let us bury the dream properly," he said. "Not like cowards in a burning storehouse." Kurata nodded. The stars overhead flickered through the haze. And somewhere in the hills, the war crept closer. Spring had reached Akizuki in name only. The cherry blossoms bloomed late and sparse, petals scattered like faint memories across the palace courtyard. Masanobu stood beneath one such tree, watching the wind carry the white-pink blossoms into the sky. In his youth, he had believed each petal represented a warrior's soul, brief, brilliant, and destined to fall. Now, they just looked like ghosts. It had been 3 weeks since the battle at Iwamuro. His unit had returned to the castle hailed as heroes, their victory celebrated with offerings of sake and hurried repairs to the damage inflicted on the village. The people murmured respect for him as he passed. The younger retainers whispered that Captain Kaito, who wore a sword and carried a gun, was the new face of Bushido. But Masanobu felt no pride in these glances. He'd buried 5 men from his command. Kurata had remained quiet since the return, spending long hours in the dojo, striking the training dummy until his hands bled, refusing to let any ash settle on his soul. Today, however, Masanobu had been summoned. He now knelt in the inner chamber of the castle, facing Lord Akizuki, who studied a map unfurled across a lacquered table. His father, Nobutaka, stood beside the lord, arms crossed, lips drawn into a line that said everything and nothing. "The tide of the Boshin war moves quickly," Lord Akizuki said. "Our allies in Satsuma are pushing toward Edo. The shogun's forces are retreating, and yet, nothing is certain." Nobutaka added, "There are whispers that Tosa and Ekizen, formerly neutral, may shift their allegiance. Victory depends not only on battles, but on loyalty." Masanobu nodded. "And ours remains with the emperor?" "Unquestionably," said Lord Akizuki. "Which is why you must go to Fukuoka." Masanobu blinked. "Fukuoka?" The lord's gaze sharpened. "The Kuroda domain remains undecided. Their samurai are torn, many support the shogunate still, though their daimyo is swaying toward the emperor's camp. We need their steel, and their silence." Nobutaka handed Masanobu a scroll. "You will attend under the guise of renewing trade agreements. But you will also meet a woman. Lady Kuroda Miseo. Daughter of a prominent court advisor." Masanobu raised an eyebrow. "You want me to court her?" Lord Akizuki chuckled. "We want you to speak to her. She is no fool. Her father listens to her counsel. She may yet tip the balance." Nobutaka was stoned. "You are not a spy, Masanobu. But in war, even the brushstroke of a fan may shift an army." Fukuoka Castle stood proud against the sky, its white walls clean and newly reinforced. Inside its gates, Masanobu found a court far more flamboyant than Akizuki's. Silk robes rustled through open corridors. Musicians plucked shamisen beneath flowering pines. But beneath the elegance lay tension. Guards at every turn. Conversations half-spoken. Everyone watching. He met Lady Miseo on the second day. She was not what he expected. Not demure. Not coy. Not subtle. She entered the garden in riding hakama and boots, her long black hair tied in a loop behind her head. Her gaze, sharp as any blade, appraised Masanobu instantly. "You're the warrior who fights with foreigners' weapons," she said, her voice smooth, deliberate. Masanobu bowed. "I am Kaito Masanobu. Of Akizuki." She studied him. "You carry yourself like a man who mourns his own armor." He said nothing. She stepped closer. "My father says your people are brave. Efficient. Dangerous. And what do you say, my lady?" "I say a samurai who speaks softly and wields a pistol may yet be Japan's future." They met again that night under the cherry trees. This time alone, with only a single lantern glowing beside the koi pond. "You were trained in Shinkage-ryu," Miseo said, pouring sake into 2 cups. "I've read scrolls on it. The body moves like water. The mind like moonlight." Masanobu took the cup, surprised. "You read Kenjutsu scrolls?" "I read everything. I was supposed to be married last year to a man who believed women should speak only through poetry." "What happened?" "I sent him a poem written in blood ink." She smiled. Masanobu laughed, genuine, brief. It had been too long since he'd laughed. She leaned closer. "Do you believe the sword will survive this new era?" "I believe the soul of the sword may outlive the steel." "And what of the men who carry it?" "That," he said, "remains to be seen." On the 4th day, as he prepared to leave, Miseo met him outside the stables. "My father is undecided," she said. "But you've given him reason to listen." "And I." She hesitated. Then added, "I think we will see each other again. On the battlefield. Or after." He bowed. "I hope it is after." As he rode out of Fukuoka, Masanobu turned once to look back at the castle. For the first time in months, the weight on his chest felt lighter. Not gone. But shifted, balanced by something like hope. But on the road ahead, a storm was gathering. And soon, no courtship, no poetry, no cherry blossoms, would be able to shield Japan from the fire to come. The imperial standard fluttered high over the fields of Suruga province, golden against a sky streaked with the gray smoke of gunpowder. Masanobu sat astride his horse on a low hill, watching the column of troops snake its way across the plain. 300 soldiers, mostly peasants now trained in volley fire, moving in coordinated rows like iron threading through the earth. Behind them rumbled 2 cannons mounted on wooden carriages, hauled by oxen, their muzzles blackened from testing. Masanobu's unit was no longer the half-shod, confused company it had once been. Now, they wore the same brown coats, carried the same Enfields, marched in the same formations as the imperial main army. But something of the old world still clung to them, in the way they kept their swords polished at their sides, even if rarely drawn. In the prayers they whispered before dawn. In the quiet tension in their eyes. Edo had fallen with barely a fight. The Tokugawa shogunate had surrendered the city weeks earlier, and while the capital changed hands peacefully, the war raged elsewhere. The last loyalists were making their stand in Aizu and the north. Masanobu's orders were to sweep the eastern domains, flush out remaining cells, and root out any sympathizers who might threaten the fragile new government. But what he hadn't expected was the name on the latest dispatch. Kanda Shunji. He read the missive again in silence, standing beneath the tattered canopy of his command tent. Kurata stood nearby, arms folded. "You know him?" the old samurai asked. Masanobu nodded once. "We trained together. In Akizuki. He was my closest friend." Kurata sighed. He's no longer your friend, if he's siding with the shogunate. The order's clear, he's aiding a resistance cell in Numazu. He must be captured. Executed if he resists. Masanobu looked down at the name again, as though it might change. Shunji had once been the kind of boy who rescued insects from water bowls. Who practiced with a broken bakken so Masanobu could use the better one. He was the first to speak after Masanobu's older brother had died. He had been family. Masanobu rolled the scroll and tucked it away. Prepare the company. We move at first light. They found the resistance 2 days later, holed up in the crumbling shell of an old temple on the edge of a pine forest. The approach was narrow, one road in, steep banks on either side. A tactical nightmare. But Masanobu had learned to fight smart. Flank left through the trees, he told Kurata. We'll draw their fire with a false advance. When they commit, collapse on the temple. Kurata grunted. And if your old friend is inside? Masanobu didn't look at him. He'll make his choice. At dawn, they moved. The resistance fired first, old matchlocks and stolen rifles, barked volleys from behind temple walls. Masanobu led his advance cautiously, weaving through bamboo and undergrowth, his unit spreading in a crescent. Smoke curled through the treetops. His men returned fire in disciplined bursts. Then a voice called from the front line. Kaito Masanobu. Masanobu froze. Is that really you? He turned. A figure stepped out from the shattered gate of the temple, bareheaded, hair loose around his shoulders, robes torn and dirty, but unmistakable. Kanda Shunji. He held no weapon. Only a scroll. I came to talk, Shunji said. If you'll hear me. The men behind Masanobu murmured in confusion. Some raised rifles. Masanobu lifted a hand. Hold fire. He stepped forward. They met halfway between the lines, under the shadow of a withered cherry tree. You're supposed to be dead, Masanobu said quietly. Shunji smiled. You're supposed to be loyal. I am. Shunji's smile faded. To what? To peace. Then why does your army leave smoke in every village it touches? Masanobu's jaw clenched. You side with the old world. The shogunate was a cage. Maybe, Shunji said. But this new world burns its own elders to build the floorboards. He held up the scroll. I have the names of 5 children from imperial raids in Koshu. Slaughtered in the name of unity. I came to bring this to your command. Not to fight. Masanobu took the scroll. You came knowing I might be the one sent for you. I came because I hoped you still believed in the kind of man you used to be. Behind them, shouts erupted. Gunfire from the right, Kurata's detachment had been spotted. The resistance inside the temple panicked, and shots rang out from every side. Go! Masanobu shouted. Shunji turned to run, but a shot cracked the air. The bullet struck him square in the chest. Masanobu rushed forward, catching his old friend as he collapsed. Shunji gasped, blood blooming across his robe. You never did duck fast enough. Masanobu cradled him in silence. Around him, the battle raged, but it was distant. Drowned beneath the sound of breath fading into stillness. The temple was cleared. 15 resistance fighters dead. 7 captured. Masanobu stood alone beneath the cherry tree again, Shunji's blood soaking the earth at its base. The scroll he had carried was burned in the fire that consumed the record's tent, deliberately, by someone else's hand. No evidence remained. Kurata approached at dusk. You didn't speak at the report, he said. No, Masanobu replied. You could have saved him. I know. Kurata looked at the tree. He was already gone when he chose the losing side. No, Masanobu whispered. He was gone when I forgot who I was. Kurata said nothing. Just bowed, and left. Masanobu drew his sword and held it up against the fading sky. Its edge caught the last light of the day. How many more friends would fall before this was over? And when it ended, if it ended, what would remain of him? The rain came down in sheets as Masanobu approached the Akizuki stronghold, his coat soaked through, his boots caked in mud from the long march west. Around him, the remnants of his company trudged in silence, 32 men, fewer than half the number who had left with him just 3 months earlier. The rest lay buried in foreign earth, their graves hastily marked in burnt-out villages, ravines, and forgotten temples. The once proud banners of Akizuki now drooped from broken poles. The old castle gates remained open, not in welcome but in weariness. Everything bore the scent of wet timber, fatigue, and scorched gunpowder. As Masanobu dismounted and handed his reins to a stable hand, he caught his reflection in a puddle, gaunt, eyes shadowed, a thin scar running along his jawline. His left shoulder ached from a bullet graze sustained outside Hamamatsu. His revolver hung heavy at his side, the blade tucked in his obi felt colder than ever before. He had expected relief on returning home. But what greeted him was not peace. It was a new war, one fought not with swords, but with suspicion. Inside the war room, Lord Akizuki stood before a wall of maps, surrounded by a group of unfamiliar men in black uniforms, their posture rigid, their eyes watching everything. They bore no clan crests. No names. Only brass buttons and foreign-cut jackets. His father was not among them. Masanobu, Lord Akizuki said without turning. You've returned later than expected. I buried more men than expected, Masanobu replied. A pause. I see. The Lord turned now, his face lined with fatigue but sharpened by something colder. The Emperor has appointed new ministers to coordinate regional military affairs. These men report to Tokyo directly. Masanobu glanced at the black-uniformed strangers. They are not of our house. No, Akizuki said. They are of the new order. The conscription office. Their loyalty is to the Meiji state, not to clan. Masanobu felt his stomach tighten. Then why are they in our council? Because we are no longer a clan, Akizuki replied. We are a prefecture. It was a word Masanobu had heard in whispered reports. He hadn't wanted to believe it. The clan system is dissolved, Lord Akizuki said, his voice as final as a blade's edge. As of this month, by imperial decree. Our retainers are to be demobilized, our lands converted into administrative zones. Your rank will be reviewed by the War Ministry in Kyoto. You may be offered a captaincy, or a clerk's post. And the samurai? They are to return to civil life. Or enlist as common soldiers under the draft. Masanobu took a step back. So everything we fought to preserve, is to be swept away like ash in wind? Akizuki's expression didn't change. This is the cost of victory. The world will not wait for us to mourn. And my father? Akizuki hesitated. One of the men in black whispered in his ear. The Lord dismissed him with a curt nod. Nobutaka resigned his post last week. He's taken ill. He no longer leaves his quarters. Masanobu felt something collapse inside him. Without speaking to me, he refused all visitors. Even me. That night, Masanobu went to the old wing of the keep, built from weathered stone and dark cypress wood, far from the new barracks. The hall smelled of tatami and incense. The corridors were dark. No guards. He slid open the door to his father's chamber. Nobutaka sat in silence, wrapped in a faded blue kimono, staring at the hearth where no fire burned. He had aged years in weeks. His beard had grayed entirely. His katana, once worn like a second spine, now rested across his knees like an old relic. "I heard you returned," he said without looking up. "I came for answers." "There are none." Masanobu stepped forward. "You swore never to lay down your sword while the clan stood." Nobutaka nodded. "The clan no longer stands. You could have fought. And become a relic in a museum of corpses," he said bitterly. "I raised you to survive, Masanobu. But survival now means swallowing fire." Masanobu knelt across from him. The silence stretched. "Do you remember what you told me when I first held a sword?" Masanobu asked. Nobutaka's eyes softened. "That a blade without a soul is just steel." "And now?" His father looked at him for a long time. "Now, the blade has no place. And we must ask ourselves what remains of the soul." In the days that followed, Masanobu wandered the castle grounds in growing unease. His unit had been disbanded. Half his men were sent to Tokyo for retraining. Others simply left. Some became constables. Some vanished. Kurata, furious, had gone into the mountains. "The sword dies with dignity," he said before leaving. "I will not watch it drown in bureaucracy." Masanobu couldn't argue. He, too, was lost. Then came the final insult. One morning, a young clerk in imperial uniform brought a lacquered box to Masanobu's room. "Captain Kaito Masanobu," the boy said, bowing stiffly. "By order of the Heitoriai Edict, issued the 3rd year of Meiji, all former samurai are hereby forbidden to wear swords in public. Your daisho is to be turned in by month's end. We thank you for your service." He placed the box on the tatami mat and left. Masanobu stared at it. The Heitoriai. The Sword Abolition Edict. The dream of centuries undone with a single scroll. He went to the dojo at midnight. He lit no lamps. Only the moon guided him. There, in silence, he performed the old forms, Shinkage Ryu katas, the ones his brother had taught him, the ones his father had corrected, the ones he had bled into for decades. Each strike felt heavier. Each step, slower. As though the air itself grieved. When he finally stopped, drenched in sweat, he knelt before his sword. "I am still here," he whispered. But the blade offered no answer. Only its reflection. A man no longer samurai. No longer soldier. Only Masanobu. And somewhere beyond the mountains, a fire still burned. Not from war, but from memory. From the belief that what they were had meant something. And that perhaps, it still could. The mountains of Kyushu rolled past in grim silence as Masanobu rode west through the narrow passes once guarded by Akizuki patrols. Now, those roads belonged to no one. Travelers walked them cautiously, merchants wrapped in silence, monks with downcast eyes, former warriors cloaked as peasants. The world had not ended with the fall of the shogunate. But something older, something sacred, had. Masanobu wore no crest. His sword, though strapped to his side, remained hidden beneath his cloak. He knew the risk. The Sword Abolition Edict was law now. Former samurai found in violation were often fined or arrested. In the South, there were even whispers of public executions for those caught openly recruiting for rebellion. Still, he could not bring himself to surrender the blade. He wasn't alone in this. Rumors spread like brushfire along the roads. Satsuma was rising. In Kagoshima, Seigo Takamori, the famed general, philosopher, and statesman who had once stood beside the emperor, had broken from the government. Disgusted by the corruption, the dismissal of samurai, and the exploitation of peasant conscripts, he had returned to his homeland and begun gathering former warriors around him. They trained not in secret, but openly. They studied artillery, read foreign manuals, but carried their swords with pride. The Meiji government dismissed it at first as a local militia, until weapons shipments were intercepted, soldiers refused orders, and loyalist prefectures began asking Tokyo for reinforcements. Now, Seigo was no longer just a retired statesman. He was the seed of a new war. And Masanobu was headed straight for him. He arrived in Kagoshima under cover of dusk, the air thick with salt and the scent of burning pine. The city had grown into a fortress. Sandbag walls lined the roads. Watchtowers overlooked the sea. But it was not the defenses that startled Masanobu. It was the discipline. Former samurai, many younger than Masanobu, some barely more than boys, moved in precise formations through the streets. They wore traditional hakama, but carried French carbines and polished bayonets. Some bore bamboo training swords. Others sharpened steel. A line of horsemen galloped across the outer training yard, dust curling up behind them. Children watched from rooftops. Shopkeepers raised fists in salute. This was no rebellion born of desperation. It was a movement born of conviction. And it had one man at its center. Seigo Takamori. Masanobu saw him that same night. The meeting was arranged through a former Akizuki retainer who had defected months earlier. Masanobu found himself escorted into a low wooden house near the foothills, its interior Spartan, tatami mats, a brazier, scrolls of poetry on the wall. Seigo sat near the window, back to the light, his frame massive, almost bear-like, though his face was calm, serene, even. He wore a simple kimono, the sleeves stained with ink. A book rested on the floor beside him. When he looked up, his eyes were not fierce. They were tired. "Kaito Masanobu," he said softly. "The sword of Akizuki." Masanobu bowed deeply. "You honor me, Seigo Dano." "Honor," Seigo murmured. They use that word like a fan in summer. To hide sweat. And fear. He motioned for Masanobu to sit. "I have read your name in reports. You served the emperor well in the war." "I served Japan," Masanobu corrected. "And now I wonder if I failed both." A flicker of amusement passed across Seigo's lips. "Good. I have no use for men who believe in victory." He poured tea himself, motioning away the guards at the door. There was no opulence here. Only sincerity. "I know why you're here," he said. "You want to know if this is rebellion. If this is another war. If we plan to raise arms against the same emperor we bled for." Masanobu said nothing. Seigo looked out the window. "The emperor is not our enemy. But those who surround him, men without blood, without loyalty, without memory, they wield him like a seal. They wear foreign suits and call it progress. They sell rice to pay for railways and let our farmers starve. They tax the people to fund a conscript army that kills its own." He turned back. "This is not rebellion. It is correction." Masanobu felt the words settle deep inside. "You would raise a banner against Tokyo?" "I would raise a mirror," Seigo replied. "And let them choose how they see themselves." He rose now, slowly. His voice lowered. "Walk among my men. Speak to them. Decide for yourself. But know this, Kaito Masanobu, if you stand with us, there will be no turning back. This will not be a brief skirmish. The Meiji court will throw every conscript they have at us. It will be fire and death. And even if we win, we may not live to see it. He stepped forward, and for the first time, Masanobu felt the weight behind the calm, the presence of a man who had no illusions, no desire for glory. Only sorrow. And steel. We are the last breath of the samurai, Seigo said. And if we must fall, let it be with our swords drawn. Not in a courtroom. Not in shame. That night, Masanobu stood on a hill overlooking the training grounds. The stars burned above like watchful gods. He could see the fires of Seigo's men below, hundreds of them, moving like waves across the field. They practiced rifle drills. They meditated. Some sparred with bakken beneath paper lanterns, sweat glistening under the moonlight. Others knelt in silent rows, heads bowed before ancestral tablets brought from home. They had nothing left to protect, except the idea of what they once were. He thought of his father, silent in the darkened keep. Of Kurata, vanished into the mountains. Of Shunji's blood at the foot of the cherry tree. Then he unwrapped his sword from the cloth and set it across his lap. "You are not illegal," he whispered. "You are not obsolete." He drew the blade. "You are Japan. And so am I." By the second month of his time in Kagoshima, Masanobu no longer dreamed of peace. The days had become a blur of drilling, ration planning, scouting, and night lectures on artillery and tactics. Seigo's rebellion, though the word rebellion still felt like a slur, had become something enormous, something alive. What had begun as a principled protest by former samurai had grown into a fully organized war machine. There were over 12,000 men under Seigo's banner now, former retainers from Satsuma, Chasha deserters, Ronin from Kyushu, and even peasants who had joined not out of ideology, but survival. Masanobu had been placed in charge of one of the largest composite companies, 400 fighters under the sigil of Akizuki, many of them former comrades, others untested volunteers who had been trained in just 6 weeks. And yet, despite their lack of uniformity, they moved with precision. Masanobu had never seen such unity, nor felt such a profound weight. He stood now on the high balcony of the castle Seigo had repurposed as a command post, watching as new recruits filed in from the north. Their faces were drawn but proud. They had come on foot, some from as far as Higo province, with little more than their father's sword and a wrapped rice ball in their sleeve. Every day, more arrive, came a voice from behind. It was General Shima, one of Seigo's most trusted commanders. A veteran of the Boshin War, he wore a patch over one eye and a blade scar across his temple. Masanobu bowed. "They are not ready." "They are willing," Shima said. "And that counts for more than training." He handed Masanobu a scroll. "Orders. We march on Kumamoto Castle in 3 days." Masanobu stiffened. Kumamoto Castle was a heavily fortified Meiji stronghold. It housed thousands of conscript troops, newly armed and well supplied. Unlike the isolated villages or half-loyal prefectures, this would be a true test. A siege. He unrolled the parchment. His company had been assigned the southern pincer, a flanking maneuver meant to cut off reinforcements from the coastal road. "You disagree?" Shima asked. "No," Masanobu said slowly. "I simply wonder, who we will be after this." Shima gave a bitter grin. "After this, we will be either dead or victorious. And if victorious, forgotten." The road to Kumamoto was long, winding, and bitterly cold. Frost clung to the banners. Many slept in their armor. Food was scarce. Some carried millet soaked in water to soften it during marches. Still, morale remained strangely high. On the fourth morning, as Masanobu's company crossed a narrow river pass, they came upon a peasant family fleeing the opposite direction, an old man, a mother, and 2 children, their belongings tied into cloth bundles. Masanobu halted them gently. "Where are you headed?" "North," the woman said, trembling. "There are soldiers, imperial soldiers, burning stores in Hideyoshi. They say they're clearing the land. For defense." Masanobu's stomach twisted. "Did they harm you?" "No. But others. Our neighbors." He reached into his satchel and gave her a packet of dried rice and miso. "Go north," he said. "Find the Satsuma scouts at the hill shrine. Tell them I sent you." As the family left, Kurata rode up beside him. The old captain had returned from the mountains weeks earlier, leaner, harder. He wore no rank insignia. Only steel. "You still believe mercy has a place in war?" Masanobu watched the children disappear around the bend. "No. But humanity must." Kurata snorted. "And who shows us mercy when the rifles fire?" Masanobu didn't answer. The battle for Kumamoto began at dawn on a cloudless day. The sky, which had for weeks hung heavy with gray clouds, finally cleared, only to reveal the distant glint of Meiji cannon barrels behind the high, obsidian walls of the castle. Masanobu stood with his company just beyond the tree line, hidden among the bamboo, scanning the western approach. Shouts echoed from the north ridge where General Shima's troops had already begun to engage. The crack of rifle fire rang out in steady bursts, followed by the dull thud of artillery. "We move when the second volley hits," Masanobu said. He turned to his men, young, grim, determined. Among them were a pair of teenage brothers who had trained under him back in Akizuki. He remembered their names, Taro and Nobu. Their father had been a weaponsmith. Their mother still wrote letters to Masanobu thanking him for making them into something proud. When the signal flare arced into the sky, bright green against the morning sun, Masanobu gave the command. "Advance!" They surged through the field, crouched low, rifles at the ready. The terrain sloped unevenly, rocks and scrub brushing against their legs. They crossed the first ridge, exchanging fire with an imperial patrol who fell back in disarray. Then the trap sprung. From the opposite hill, concealed under camouflage nets, imperial gunners opened fire. Masanobu saw the first cannonball strike his left flank. 3 men went flying. He shouted for cover, pulling his troops into a tight horseshoe formation along the ravine. Smoke choked the air. Cries of pain erupted all around. "Hold," he roared. "Check your lines. Fire in pairs." They returned fire with discipline, but the terrain was uneven. The Imperials had elevation. Masanobu scanned the line for a break, and found it near the northern brush where his sub-commander, Lieutenant Hanada, had been stationed. But Hanada was gone. So were 20 of his men. Masanobu's heart sank. He signaled for Kurata and 2 runners. "They broke rank," Kurata said. "Left us open." "Sabotage," Masanobu muttered. He knew the formation. He waited for this moment. The traitor had been inside the rebellion from the beginning. "Send word to General Shima," he ordered. "We're exposed." "No time," Kurata said. "We must collapse the line now, or we'll be cut in half." Masanobu's countercharge was brutal, desperate, and devastating. He led it himself, blade drawn, roaring as he plunged into the northern ridge with 30 men behind him. Riflemen laid down covering fire. Bayonets gleamed. Blood sprayed across the frosted grass. They reached the abandoned position and held it, but only barely. 27 men remained by dusk. Masanobu sat in a shallow trench, one arm bleeding, his coat shredded. Kurata stood nearby, chewing a strip of dried meat. Hanada's gone. Slipped out through the merchant trail. Took maps with him. Masanobu nodded slowly. Then we have more enemies than we thought. He looked toward Kumamoto Castle, still distant, still defiant. This wasn't a battle, he said. It was a test. Kurata raised an eyebrow. Of what? Whether we have anything left to lose. That night, Seigo gathered his officers in the command tent. Masanobu arrived late, limping slightly, his wound hastily bound. General Shima stood over the table, flanked by messengers covered in soot. We've confirmed Hanada's treachery, he said. He's gone to Tokyo. The Meiji court now knows our positions. Our supply chains. Our timetable. Seigo said nothing for a long moment. Then, with an expression like stone, he looked to Masanobu. We will fight anyway, he said. We will march not because we can win, but because we must not vanish. He placed a folded cloth on the table. Inside lay a single sword, a curved blade, polished and perfect. Masanobu recognized it. It had belonged to Seigo's younger brother, who had died at Toba Fushimi. I entrust this to you now, Seigo said. Because I believe you understand the weight of it. Masanobu bowed deeply, hands trembling as he accepted the sword. Not out of honor. But because there was no one else left. The sky above Kumamoto had turned colorless. Gray smoke curled perpetually over the castle's distant silhouette, mingling with the mist that clung to the foothills. The land around it, once fertile with spring rice shoots, was scorched and barren, cratered by cannon fire, stripped of trees, and soaked with blood. For weeks now, Masanobu's men had lived among mud, ash, and memory. The siege had failed. The fortress still held. Kumamoto's defenders had received resupply from the sea, imperial ships flying the new chrysanthemum crest, bearing modern arms and food. The Satsuma army, meanwhile, was collapsing inward, its momentum slowing like a wounded beast. Inside Masanobu's encampment, the fires burned low. The rice had run out 3 days ago. Now they boiled pine bark and millet soaked in river water. Horses died in the night, and meat was rationed to a few ounces per soldier. And yet, no one left. Not even the young ones. Taro and Nobu, the brothers from Akizuki, remained at Masanobu's side. Taro had lost 2 fingers to frostbite. Nobu walked with a cane now after a misfire shattered his ankle. We're still here, Taro whispered one night, wrapping his hands with cloth. Why? Masanobu looked up from where he sat sharpening his sword, the steel whispering softly against the stone. Because we remember what it felt like to be samurai, he said. But what if the world forgets? Nobu asked. Masanobu didn't answer. He wasn't sure the world hadn't already. That same week, Masanobu was summoned by General Shima to a ravine near the southern line, one of the few places still protected from enemy artillery. Shima stood beside a prisoner, Hanada, the traitor. He was bloodied and tied at the wrists, kneeling on the wet ground. The guards had found him in a village 2 valleys west, trying to contact a Meiji scout convoy. His face bore no shame, only resignation. You came all this way, Masanobu said, stepping close. For what? Hanada smiled faintly. For the future. You killed it. No, Hanada said. I ended something that had already died. You just refused to bury it. You gave them our maps. Our men died screaming in the dark because of you. Hanada's expression hardened. And how many more will die because of your pride? The emperor you claim to protect never even asked for your swords. You fight for your own ghosts. Shima stepped forward, katana in hand. I give you the right, Masanobu, he said. You serve beside him. You may deliver judgment. The wind rustled the dry grass around them. Masanobu looked into Hanada's eyes. There was no defiance left in them. No remorse, either. Only the emptiness of a man who had gambled everything on the side that history would remember, and lost. Masanobu drew his sword slowly, its blade catching the gray light. I won't kill you, he said. Shima frowned. He betrayed us. I won't kill him here, Masanobu corrected. Not like this. Give him to the men. Let them decide if they still believe in justice. Later that evening, Hanada was placed in the center of the encampment. Masanobu told the truth to the starving men around him, of the betrayal, the ambush, the lost maps. He gave no orders. He offered no weapons. The men didn't kill him. They turned their backs. All of them. Hanada was left alone in the dark, weeping silently into his bound hands. The next morning, he was gone. No one searched for him. Not out of mercy, but because there was nothing left in him to kill. A week later, Masanobu rode out with a scouting party toward the mountain passes. Rumors had reached them that reinforcements from Tosa, former shogunate loyalists turned neutral, might be convinced to supply food or volunteers. But what he found instead was a funeral. A burned village. Roofs collapsed inward. Trees cut down for barricades. Ash 6 inches deep in every home. And 30 corpses, old men, children, women, lined up along the temple wall, executed by bullet, their hands still tied. Imperial conscripts, one scout said bitterly. They think every village shelters rebels. They're not wrong, another murmured. But they've stopped caring who they punish. Masanobu dismounted slowly. He walked among the dead, staring into blank, open faces. Then he found a scrap of cloth, red thread embroidered with a peony. Lady Misao's favorite flower. His hand shook as he turned it over. It was a sleeve. Torn from a woman's robe. Near it, a small bundle of half-charred paper, a letter, singed by fire. His eyes widened. It was signed, Kuroda Misao. Alive. But fleeing. He gathered the remnants and placed them inside his satchel. She had been in this village. Perhaps even tried to reason with the Meiji soldiers. Her family had once walked both sides of the razor's edge. Now they had been cut. Kurata approached. We can't stay here. The smoke will draw scouts. Masanobu looked once more at the ruin. Then he said, send word to Seigo. We move south. We no longer siege Kumamoto. Kurata frowned. We retreat? No, Masanobu said. We scatter. We bleed them from the shadows. We stop fighting like soldiers. And start fighting like ghosts. Kurata's eyes narrowed. You're changing the rules. No, Masanobu replied. I'm remembering them. That night, Masanobu wrote a letter by firelight. To Lord Akizuki, should this ever reach you. We fought for a country that no longer speaks the language of our hearts. But we are not dead. Not yet. Then he sheathed his sword, checked his pistol, and looked out at the vast, ruined land. The empire had forgotten its blade. But the blade remembered itself. The hills of Kyushu had gone silent again. No longer a war front in the traditional sense, the once loud clash of rebellion had faded into whispering ambushes, shattered supply trains, and sleepless nights in caves hollowed from black rock. After the failed siege at Kumamoto, Masanobu's forces had splintered like glass, scattered across the southern passes, breaking into irregular cells. They called it tactical dispersal. But Masanobu knew the truth. It was retreat. He led one of the few remaining active bands, 40 men, nearly all of them from Akizuki, loyal even in starvation. They wore patchwork uniforms, some wrapped in stolen Meiji coats for warmth, others draped in the remnants of their family crests. Their rifles were old. Ammunition was scarce. Food was rarer still. And yet they fought. Every week, they struck a new target, a supply train near Oita, a gunpowder store in Tanegashima, a telegraph tower just outside Miyazaki. Each victory cost more lives than they could afford. And each one pushed them further into obscurity. But still, Masanobu pressed on, not because he believed they could win, but because surrender now would make the entire rebellion meaningless. What else was left? One fog-shrouded morning, as dawn filtered weakly through the trees, a scout returned breathless, mud caked to his legs, his face pale with urgency. "Captain Kaito," he gasped, "we've found her." Masanobu didn't have to ask who. He followed the scout through the dense mountain pass, skirting low and silent beneath the canopy of twisted pines. The air was thick with fog and the scent of wet leaves. Rain had fallen the night before, muting the world to a hush. They crested a ridge and looked down into a ruined village. Only a few intact buildings remained. Smoke drifted from a chimney. And near the temple steps, wrapped in a heavy blue cloak and leaning on a wooden staff, stood Miseo. She looked thinner. Older. Her hair was cropped now, tied behind her head in a knot like a widow. She stared into the distance, unmoving. Masanobu approached slowly. She turned before he could speak. "I heard the hills whisper your name," she said softly. "I left letters," he replied. "I burned them," she answered. "Too dangerous to carry. But I read them. Every one." There was no embrace. They simply stood together beneath the twisted branches, both marked by the long road between them. "Your father?" Masanobu asked. "Killed during a protest in Fukuoka. Labeled a dissident." "And you?" "I escaped with forged documents. I became a healer here. They tolerate me because I know how to close wounds." She touched the pouch at her hip. "Not open them." She studied him then, really looked at him. His sunken eyes, the long scar beneath his left cheek, the calloused hand still wrapped around a rifle barrel. "You've become a shadow," she whispered. "And yet, still a sword." "I've forgotten the difference," he said. They sat that night in a ruined tea room, a single oil lamp casting long shadows across the wood floor. He told her of Seigo's last stand in Mayakanojo, of the starvation, the treachery, the silence from Tokyo. She told him of the people who still believed the samurai would return, not in armor, but in principle. "We don't need warriors," she said, pouring hot water over dried herbs. "We need memory. The memory of why you carried the blade in the first place." Masanobu stared into the cup she handed him. "You believe we've become monsters. I believe you were never meant to be this," she said gently. "You were born to protect. Not to vanish." That night, a messenger arrived under cover of fog, an old man with torn sleeves and a knife wound in his side. He collapsed in Masanobu's tent, clutching a blood-soaked scroll. It bore Seigo's seal. "To all who still carry the sword of Satsuma. I no longer lead. The hill at Shiroyama is to be my grave. I ask nothing of you, only that you remember why we began. And why we must end. This is not surrender. It is completion." Masanobu stared at the scroll for a long time. Then he walked to the edge of the ridge, the stars flickering overhead. He could see the faint glow of Shiroyama far in the south, orange light on the clouds. Seigo had chosen the hill where the last true samurai would make their final stand. There would be no reinforcements. No escape. Kurata stood beside him, silent. "We could ride," the old captain said. "One last stand. We would die." Kurata nodded. "Better that than this slow rot." But Masanobu shook his head. "No. We stay." Kurata stared. "You would abandon him?" "I would carry him," Masanobu said quietly. "Beyond the sword. Into something that survives." Kurata spat. "And what is that?" "A story," Masanobu replied. "One not written in blood." He left that night with Miseo. Together, under the cover of fog and wind, they crossed the river valley. They moved by instinct, no plan, no map, just a direction, away. Away from Shiroyama. Away from glory. Away from death. They passed refugee camps filled with widows and orphans, villages whose shrines still held the names of fallen retainers. And slowly, Masanobu began to speak. To teach. To record. Not as a commander. But as a witness. He buried his sword under the roots of an ancient tree outside Akizuki. He did not weep. He simply knelt and placed his hands on the soil. "You carried me far," he whispered. "But I must walk without you now." Years later, under the reign of Emperor Meiji, a small school was founded in the outskirts of the old Akizuki territory. It taught history. And poetry. And the way of the sword, not to glorify it, but to remember its weight. Its name was Tsuyosa no Kyoku, the memory of strength. And sometimes, an old man with silver in his hair and lines around his eyes would sit beneath a cherry tree and tell the children. We did not fight to win. We fought so the world would know we were once here. That we believed in something. That we stood, even when the ground beneath us vanished. And the wind would carry his words away like petals. But the roots? The roots remained. The rain returned with spring. In the town that had once been Akizuki, now folded into the new Fukuoka prefecture, people no longer wore clan crests on their sleeves. Samurai families had traded their swords for brushes, their horses for carts, their shrines for schoolhouses. The once gravel parade ground of the Akizuki garrison now housed a Western-style civic hall, its red tile roof peeking above the plum trees like a foreign crown pressed on local soil. But the mountains still loomed unchanged. And beneath those peaks, hidden from the railway lines and the telegraph poles, Masanobu lived again, not as a warrior, but as a teacher. The school had grown modestly in 5 years. What began as a single room beneath a borrowed roof had now become a proper building, 2 floors, 8 rooms, and over 60 students. Boys and girls alike. Sons of farmers. Daughters of blacksmiths. And the occasional child of a disgraced samurai, whose family name could no longer buy bread. They didn't learn Bushido. Not as dogma. They learned Fudoshin, the stillness of heart. Rei, respect. Makoto, sincerity. The values once forged in steel, now taught through stories, poetry, and discipline. Each morning, Masanobu would tie back his graying hair, dress in a plain kimono, and greet his pupils with a bow deeper than his station demanded. And each night, he sat beneath the old cherry tree behind the school, where a single stone marked the resting place of his blade. He never spoke its name aloud. But he remembered it. As he remembered every face he'd ever seen fall in the rain. Miseo, now his wife, managed the school's ledgers and correspondence. She had grown thinner with the years but remained sharp, like a polished tanto, small, elegant, and able to cut through any bureaucratic insult. The government had offered grants for the school's expansion, but only if Masanobu agreed to adopt the national curriculum entirely. He refused. He would not teach that the samurai had been a parasitic class, as some textbooks now claimed. He would not glorify rebellion either. He simply told the truth. And the truth, more than once, earned him visits from men in official dress with polite smiles and hollow warnings. "You risk your position," Miseo reminded him once, after such a visit. "I gave up my sword," he said. "Not my spine." One evening, during the summer of Meiji year 15, Masanobu received an envelope sealed in black wax. It had no return name. Inside was a letter, written in a hand he hadn't seen since the first year of the war. Karata. Masanobu. If you're reading this, I am likely already ash. I stayed in the south after the fall of Shiroyama. Watched the last embers flicker and vanish. I thought I could grow old without bowing, but the world demands your knees, eventually. Still, before I go, I must tell you something I never dared during the war. Hanada was not the only traitor. One of the Akizuki court advisors, your own cousin, Kaito Aimasa, fed information to the Meiji court in exchange for his family's land title and political position. He was the one who exposed our munitions route. The one that led to the ambush at Kumamoto. You lost 17 men that day. I lost my son. You never knew his name. But I did. I did not kill Aimasa. I wanted to. But I knew what your blade meant to you. I wanted to believe we were better. Now I wonder if I was wrong. I leave the choice to you. If the sword still has a place in this world, let it decide. Masanobu read the letter 3 times before the candle burned low. He said nothing. Not to Miseo. Not to the students. For 3 days, he remained silent, walking the perimeter of the school, tending the garden, reading poetry by the window. But inside, the storm gathered. Not grief. Not anger. Something more dangerous. Memory. Aimasa had become a kanri, a civil administrator of the new Fukuoka prefecture. He wore a top hat now. He rode in a Western-style carriage. He gave speeches at the opening of new rail stations, always ending with, "For the good of our emperor and people." They met in a tea house outside town. Masanobu arrived in his teacher's robes. Aimasa, wearing a Western suit, looked startled to see him. "Kaito Dano," he said, trying to summon a smile. "It has been too long." "Since Kumamoto," Masanobu said. Aimasa flinched. "Ah, yes. Those were difficult days. I don't think we. Karata is dead." Aimasa went still. "I received his letter," Masanobu continued. "He named you." The room went very quiet. "I did what I had to," Aimasa said finally. "We would have lost everything. The government promised leniency. I believed." "You believed you were saving your skin," Masanobu said. Aimasa lowered his voice. "The samurai were a doomed caste. I helped our house survive. We still exist." "No," Masanobu said. "We endured. You survived." Aimasa swallowed. "Will you kill me?" Masanobu set a folded cloth on the table. Inside it was a single letter opener, simple steel. Sharp enough. "I buried my sword," he said. "But I did not bury what it meant." Aimasa stared at the blade. Masanobu rose. "You may carry this weight with you. Or return it to me when you no longer can." He left without looking back. Autumn arrived, and with it, a cool wind through the school's pines. Masanobu taught a class that week on the concept of giri, obligation, duty. A student raised his hand. "Sensei, what happens when duty and justice are different?" Masanobu paused. Then answered, "You suffer. But you do not surrender." The boy nodded, and the room was quiet. Outside, the cherry tree had not yet shed its leaves. But one petal, just one, fluttered down to the stone where the sword slept. Winter fell gently over Akizuki. Snow did not rage here, it settled like quiet breath, blanketing the rooftops and weighing down the pine boughs in reverent stillness. The school remained open, though fewer students made the daily climb through the forest. Lessons continued by lantern light, and the tatami floors were lined with extra straw mats to keep the cold from biting through. Masanobu wore gloves now when writing, his joints slower than they once were. And yet, his voice remained strong, his eyes as sharp as the day he stood before Seigo in rebellion. But the world had changed again. And it was coming for him. The letter arrived unannounced, hand-delivered by a military courier in pristine Meiji uniform. The boy, he couldn't have been older than 20, bowed respectfully, then stood with perfect posture as Masanobu unfolded the thick paper. To Kaito Masanobu Dano, formerly of the Akizuki domain. Your name has come to our attention through the Office of Historical Integration and Military Instruction. In the interest of forging a modern and unified Japan, the Ministry of War seeks capable advisors with both martial and ethical distinction to assist in forming the new officer training corps. We are aware of your former affiliation with Seigo Takamori. This is not a summons for punishment. It is an invitation to shape the future. General Otagawa Kenjiro will arrive in person within the week. Prepare for inspection. Signed, Major Arakawa Noboru. Ministry of War, Tokyo. Masanobu reread it twice. Then he burned it in the brazier. Miseo, who had watched silently from the doorway, said only, "So they come not with blades, but with handshakes." "They come with neither," Masanobu murmured. "They come with silence. And want me to speak for them." Otagawa arrived on horseback 5 days later, his uniform a precise blend of European tailoring and Japanese design, high boots, iron jacket, ceremonial sword at his side. He was in his mid-30s, clean-shaven, eyes quick and intelligent. Masanobu received him in the school's tea room. "No guards?" Masanobu asked. Otagawa smiled faintly. "If you wished to kill me, you would have done so already. A samurai wouldn't strike a guest. Nor would he burn an invitation." Masanobu did not smile. Otagawa removed his gloves and gestured around the room. "I've read your work. I know what this school stands for. Then why ask me to join your army?" "Because those boys out there," he nodded toward the training field, where a dozen students practiced calligraphy, "will be handed rifles, uniforms, and orders someday. And they won't remember why." Masanobu studied him. "And you think I can remind them?" "I think you can teach them to deserve it." Masanobu was silent for a long time. Then said, "You served under Seigo?" Otagawa hesitated. "I fought against him. At Shiroyama." "Did you see him die?" "No one saw him fall. Only the final charge. Then smoke." "Then you know," Masanobu said, rising to pour tea. "This nation was forged in smoke. You can't teach clarity in a haze. But you can guide the ones walking through it," Otagawa said quietly. "Come to Tokyo. Speak to the cadets. Teach them Rei. Teach them why not every enemy should be hated. Why a uniform is not a soul." Masanobu looked down at the tea leaves spinning in the cup. The war buried everything I believed, he said. But I've spent these years unearthing pieces. You ask me to pick up the shovel again. No, Otagawa said. I ask you to choose the garden. That night, Miseo found him beneath the cherry tree, staring at the stone marker where his katana lay buried. They will offer you influence, she said. A platform. Respect. But none of that brings back what was lost. I don't want it back, Masanobu said. I want it understood. She knelt beside him. Then go. But don't become what they expect. Speak. Not as their soldier. As ours. 2 weeks later, Masanobu arrived in Tokyo. The capital had become unrecognizable: stone streets, gas lamps, carriages pulled by foreigners. Western suits outnumbered kimonos. The air buzzed with telegrams and coal smoke. Towers of steel and glass were being erected where shrines once stood. He was greeted at the gates of the Imperial War College by Major Arakawa himself, a thin, hawkish man with eyes that moved like a blade. You will be speaking to the first full class of national officers, Arakawa said. Some fought against Seigo. Others are the sons of those who hanged his followers. Will they listen? They've read your essays. They think you're a relic. Good, Masanobu said. Let them hear a relic speak. The hall was quiet. 100 cadets. All in uniform. All seated with straight backs and unreadable faces. Masanobu walked to the center without ceremony. He bowed. Then spoke. You carry rifles, he began. But you do not yet carry Japan. A murmur stirred. When I was your age, I wore armor. Not because it was useful, but because I believed it made me strong. I was wrong. Strength is not what you wear. It's what you carry, and what you refuse to drop, even when the nation says it is inconvenient. He looked at them, eyes hard. You are not samurai. But you are soldiers. And that means you inherit our shame. Our glory. Our silence. You may not believe in Bushido. But you will serve something. Ask yourself, what deserves your obedience? He waited. The room stayed silent. Then he bowed again and left. Back in Akizuki, Miseo opened a letter weeks later. They listened. Not all. But enough. They asked questions after. The right ones. I will return next month. If I still know the road. Keep the tea warm. Kaito. She smiled. Then lit incense for the students who never returned from the war. And for those just now stepping into one, without ever knowing it. Spring returned to Akizuki in a slow unfolding. The cherry tree beside the school had bloomed early, its petals soft as breath. Children gathered beneath it in the afternoons, their ink-stained sleeves fluttering as they recited poetry. The war, to them, was a thing of scrolls and stories, events etched in dates and names, not in the eyes of their teachers. Masanobu watched them from the veranda, wrapped in a faded haori. His lectures at the War College in Tokyo had ended months ago, but their consequences lingered. Cadets had begun sending letters, some curious, others critical, but a few trembling with the ache of understanding. He answered none of them. Until one arrived in Seigo's hand. Or so it seemed. The letter was wrapped in rice paper, sealed with an old Satsuma mon. The handwriting was youthful, but careful. Inside, the words were sparse. Kaito Dano. My father was among those who died on the slope of Shiroyama. He spoke your name in his final letter. I seek the truth of what happened there. Not the truth printed in textbooks. The truth only blood remembers. Please. I must speak with you. Hayato Seigo. Masanobu read the name again. Seigo. It was not a common surname. And the seal, authentic, unmistakable, confirmed what his instincts whispered. A descendant. Possibly the son of the man who led the final stand of the samurai. Masanobu sent no reply. But 2 weeks later, a youth in a crisp academy coat arrived at the gate of the school. His face was lean, his posture rigid. He bowed deeply. "I am Hayato," he said. "Son of Seigo Takamori." They sat in the tea room. Miseo served tea without a word. Her eyes flicked once over the boy's face, reading the grief just beneath its proud surface. Then she left them. "You look like him," Masanobu said after a long silence. "I never met him," Hayato replied. "He died before I could speak. I was there when he fell." Hayato leaned forward, trembling. "Then tell me. Did he die fighting? Did he charge, as they say? Blade drawn, leading men to the end?" Masanobu looked into his tea. "No," he said. Silence. Hayato's eyes widened. "No one will admit it," Masanobu continued. "But Seigo was already wounded. Shot through the hip. Carried down the hill by his retainers. He gave his last order not with a sword, but with a whisper. But the legends are lies. Beautiful ones. But still lies." Hayato sat frozen. Masanobu's voice was low. He ordered his closest man, Beppu Shinsuke, to help him take his own life. Not because he feared capture, but because he believed a samurai's end must be chosen, not granted. He died in pain, not glory. And he never reached the enemy line. Hayato gripped the edge of the tatami. Then everything they teach us is a mask. One meant to shape obedience, not memory. Masanobu rose and crossed to a low wooden chest. From inside, he withdrew a cloth bundle. He set it gently on the floor and unwrapped it. Inside lay a weathered scabbard. The blade within, untouched for years, still shone with a soft, haunted gleam. "This was Seigo's short sword," Masanobu said. Hayato stared. "It was given to me after the war, secretly. I've kept it all this time. Not as a relic. As a truth." He handed it to the boy. Hayato hesitated. Then took it in both hands, reverent. "I want to carry his name with honor," he whispered. "Then don't imitate him," Masanobu said. "Understand him." That night, Masanobu sat beside the cherry tree, listening to the wind rustling the blossoms. Miseo joined him. "Will you give it to him?" she asked. "I already have. He's young. He could become anything." "He already has," Masanobu murmured. "He's become the weight of his father's silence." Miseo placed her hand on his. "He'll carry it differently." "I hope so." 2 weeks passed. Then word arrived. A new policy was being debated in Tokyo, the revision of the national history curriculum. The proposal sought to consolidate recent history, to remove references to the rebellion at Shiroyama as a civil war and instead frame it as a regional disturbance. Seigo's name would be reduced to a footnote. His ideals, deleted. Masanobu stared at the notice for a long time. Then took up his brush. To General Otagawa Kenjiro. "If you erase a war, you only guarantee another. If you erase a man, you rob his descendants of balance. I do not ask you to glorify rebellion. I ask you to acknowledge that your empire was born in contradiction. You wish to educate a generation? Then give them the full wound. Not just the scar. He sealed the letter. Then packed a single bag. I must go to Tokyo, he told Masao. She nodded. And this time? I don't go to fight, he said. I go to remember. Tokyo burned with ambition. Not literal flames, but the feverish heat of modernization, buildings rising like steel prayers, alleys echoing with the click of foreign shoes, and the thunderous chant of printing presses rolling out the future, one pamphlet at a time. Masanobu stepped from the train onto the stone platform of Shimbashi Station, wrapped in a simple traveling kimono, clutching a lacquered satchel. Around him, students in stiff uniforms shouted about electric wires and parliamentary reform. But none of them bowed anymore. Few even looked his way. To the new generation, he was no more than a shadow in an age of bright lights. Still, he walked on. The Ministry of Education stood in the old district of Kanda, a three-story building shaped like a Western courthouse, flanked by stone lions and red banners declaring "Knowledge is civilization." Inside, the hall smelled of ink and cedar, the scent of bureaucracy wrapped in noble purpose. He was greeted at the door by Otagawa Kenjiro. The general had aged swiftly. His beard now streaked with silver, his eyes burdened with the weight of compromise. You shouldn't have come, he said quietly. Masanobu bowed. And yet I am here. The curriculum is already passed. The emperor has approved the revision. Seigo's name will appear as a regional dissenter. Nothing more. Then I'm not here to change policy, Masanobu replied. I'm here to testify. Otagawa hesitated. They won't listen. Then they'll remember my silence. The hearing room was smaller than Masanobu expected. A simple chamber paneled in polished pine, with a long table flanked by 6 education commissioners, each wearing the same rigid expression, polite interest, calculated detachment. In the gallery, officers, historians, a few foreign observers. And Hayato, seated near the rear, clutching a leather-bound notebook. Masanobu stepped forward. No guards. No gavel. Just words. He bowed deeply, and spoke. I am Kaito Masanobu. Former captain of the Akizuki domain. Servant of Lord Akizuki Mitsuhide. Retainer to no one since the death of Seigo Takamori. He raised his head slowly. I come not to glorify rebellion. Nor to justify bloodshed. I come to offer a stone, not for a statue, but for a grave. A grave our country has chosen to pave over. One commissioner leaned forward. This is not a court of memory. It is a policy board. Then remember your policy was born from memory, Masanobu said. And memory is made of men. He took out the small bundle. Unwrapped it. Seigo's Wakizashi. A ripple passed through the room. He did not die as you print, Masanobu said. He died in agony. Not because he lost, but because he was betrayed by the very government he fought to build. The commissioners exchanged glances. Another spoke. The emperor has decreed unity must be preserved. Unity built on lies, Masanobu replied, voice rising slightly, will shatter at the first quake. He stepped back. Looked each man in the eye. You erase Seigo's honor, you erase your own. You erase me. But worse, you erase the why behind your power. A silence followed. Then a young official said, almost whispering, what do you propose? Masanobu breathed deeply. Teach the rebellion. All of it. Not as shame. Not as legend. As a question. Let the students decide. One commissioner scowled. You would turn samurai into debate material? No, Masanobu said. I would turn them into teachers. He left without applause. But Hayato caught up with him at the stairs. "They won't change it," he said bitterly. "No," Masanobu agreed. "But now they can't pretend no one challenged it." Hayato looked at him then, not as a student, not even as a son of Seigo. As a witness. "You are what I hope to become." Masanobu placed a hand on his shoulder. "Then you already are." Back in Akizuki, the cherry blossoms fell again. The children ran beneath them, shouting poetry lines and throwing petals at one another like snow. Masanobu sat beneath the tree, a scroll open in his lap. It was a letter. To be read by the students of Tsuyosa no Kyoku. "There will come a time when no one remembers my name. Let that not trouble you. But remember this. We lived. We chose. We failed and rose. And the blade I buried is still sharp in the hands of memory." He placed the scroll in the archive chest. Then rose. The wind shifted. Somewhere far away, a printing press clicked into motion. And a history textbook, revised once again, now bore a footnote. Seigo Takamori, military leader, rebel, philosopher. His final stand at Shiroyama remains a subject of interpretation and debate among modern historians. It was not a victory. But it was not an erasure. And sometimes, that was enough. The rain that night came in sheets, not drops, heavy, relentless, a curtain of memory falling over the mountains. Masanobu sat in the school archive room, sorting through scrolls for a lecture on political ethics. His students had begun asking harder questions, about rebellion, about authority, about what it truly meant to protect peace. He encouraged them to ask. But he didn't always know how to answer. Outside, thunder rolled across the hills. Then a knock. 3 firm strikes on the gate. Not the soft tap of a traveler, nor the eager rattle of a child. It was a soldier's knock, deliberate, commanding. Masanobu opened the door. And stared into the eyes of a ghost. Rain poured from the brim of the visitor's straw hat. Beneath it, streaks of silver threaded through his beard. His right arm hung motionless in its sleeve. A scar split his cheek like a bolt of lightning carved into flesh. Kurata Genzo. Alive. Masanobu, the man said simply. "You're supposed to be Ash," Masanobu replied. Kurata chuckled. "Aren't we all, in the end?" They drank together in silence for a time, in the old tea room where the floors still creaked from their training days. Kurata removed his soaked coat, revealing the remnants of a uniform no longer recognized by any official army. Patches of the Satsuma crest still clung to the cloth like stubborn barnacles. "I thought you fell at Kumamoto," Masanobu said. "I fell," Kurata replied. "But I did not stay down. You were reported dead. I let them think that. Gave me time to disappear. Not all of us can make peace with the world." Masanobu set down his cup. "Why are you here?" Kurata leaned forward. "I've come to ask you to pick up your sword." Masanobu's breath slowed. "No. You haven't heard the plan." "I don't need to." Kurata's voice sharpened. "The Emperor is a puppet. The new elite are sons of merchants and cowards. The samurai spirit has not been defeated, only silenced. But it lives. In us. In pockets across Kyushu. In the shadows of Sendai. Even in Edo, there are whispers. Whispers turn into screams," Masanobu said coldly. "And screams summon fire." Kurata grinned. "Then let it burn again." That night, Masanobu sat alone under the cherry tree. Miseo joined him after a time. "He hasn't changed," she said. "No. But I have. Will he try to drag you back? He already did. Then let me ask you what you once asked yourself, who is your lord now? Masanobu was silent. Then, my students. The next morning, Kurata remained at the gate, waiting. I'm leaving, he said. Tonight. South, toward Kagoshima. We're gathering there. We'll march not as rebels, but as sons of Yamato. One final stand. You won't make it to the coast, Masanobu said. Then we die in purpose. You die in pride. Kurata's eyes burned. You of all people should understand. I do, Masanobu said. That's why I won't follow you. He turned to go. Kurata's voice halted him. You buried your sword. Not your guilt. Masanobu looked back. Then let me teach you what I teach my students. Guilt is not something you erase. It's something you carry properly. Kurata stared. Then bowed, deep, formal, respectful. Then may we die on opposite hills, Kaito Masanobu. May you live long enough to regret it. That night, Masanobu retrieved the sword from beneath the stone. Not to use it. To clean it. To remember. Then he wrapped it again. Returned it to its place. And lit incense for the man Kurata used to be. He wrote a letter to Otagawa. A storm gathers in Kyushu again. Don't meet it with bullets. Meet it with ears. Before we kill another generation for echoes. Then he returned to the classroom. Where the war, he knew now, would never end. But it could be rewritten. One lesson at a time. The uprising began, as most do, with a whisper in a tea house. Then a crate of smuggled rifles. Then a dead constable in the town of Hideyoshi, throat slit, uniform stripped, his pistol missing. By the time the Meiji government received full reports, 6 minor garrisons across southern Kyushu had been overrun. The rebels wore no uniform, carried no banner, and claimed no official leader. But intelligence agents whispered one name through clenched teeth. Kurata Genzo. The government response was swift. A battalion of conscripted soldiers, young men raised on textbooks and rifle drills, was dispatched from Kagoshima and Kumamoto. They were under orders not just to suppress, but to eliminate. It was history repeating itself. And this time, Masanobu could not sit and watch it happen again. He left Akizuki under a soft sunrise, carrying nothing but a satchel, a change of robes, and a small cloth bundle containing the sheathed katana, not drawn in years, but still respected. Miseo stood at the gate as he departed. You know he'll try to kill you, she said. Masanobu gave a slow nod. Then I must give him a better choice. Come back to me. He met her gaze, and for a moment, neither was samurai nor widow, teacher nor scribe. They were only two people who had lost too many pieces of each other to time. I'll return, he said. Not because I can promise safety. But because I no longer carry the need to die for my beliefs. Only to live by them. Then he bowed to her. And walked into the south. The journey took 6 days. He passed through abandoned farmsteads and scorched roads, places that still bore the scars of the Satsuma Rebellion. In the hills outside Minamata, he saw training camps, small, ragged groups of men and boys, armed with mismatched rifles and old swords. They looked at him with suspicion, until he gave his name. Then they bowed. Not in reverence. In recognition. You're the man who spoke against the ministry, one said. No, Masanobu replied. I'm the man who watched the cost of silence. He found Kurata at the ruins of a Buddhist temple on the edge of the Hideyoshi Basin. The rebels had taken the grounds as a makeshift command post. A bonfire crackled in the courtyard where monks once prayed. The bell tower had been converted into a watchpost, its ancient bronze bell silent. Kurata stood near the flames, issuing orders. He looked thinner now. Hollowed. But when he saw Masanobu, a strange smile crossed his face. "I knew you'd come. You knew I'd try to stop you." "Same thing." They walked together into the woods behind the temple. There, Kurata offered him a flask. Masanobu refused. "You've gone too far," he said. Kurata shrugged. "Not far enough. Tokyo doesn't listen to speeches. Only shock. You'll be crushed. These are not samurai behind you, they're farmers, exiles, angry boys. You lead them into slaughter. They want to die for something. And you let them?" Kurata turned. His face cracked, just for a moment, with pain. "I watched our world vanish, Masanobu. I survived it. And I hate that I did. So I gave them a fire. Something to die with instead of rot." "They don't need a fire," Masanobu said. "They need someone to teach them how to carry the ashes." Kurata laughed bitterly. "You came with words." Masanobu unwrapped the cloth bundle slowly. Laid his katana across a moss-covered stone. "I came with the last of my blade," he said. "Not to use it. To bury it. In front of them. In front of you." Kurata stared. "You shame me." "No," Masanobu said. "I remember you. That's different." He stepped back. "You can stop this. You can walk away. Or at least let your men go." "And what will they do? Return to a world that has already forgotten them?" "No," Masanobu said. "They'll build one that remembers." The following morning, Masanobu stood before the assembled rebels. He told them the story of Shiroyama. Not the glorious legend. The truth. Of Seigo crawling through the mud. Of comrades dying in smoke and silence. Of what was lost, not won. Some wept. Some left. Kurata did not. But that night, beneath the torii gate at the temple's edge, he placed his own sword beside Masanobu's. He said nothing. But his hand lingered on the hilt. As if letting go for the first time. Word reached Tokyo within the week, the Hitoyoshi rebels had disbanded. No shots fired. No blood spilled. Some soldiers grumbled about cowardice. Some politicians whispered about Masanobu being dangerous. But Otagawa Kenjiro sent only a 3-line report to the Ministry of War. No enemy remains in the basin. No fire was lit. Only history. Masanobu returned to Akizuki under plum blossoms. The schoolchildren shouted his name as he climbed the hill. And Miseo stood in the doorway of their home, arms folded, tears gleaming beneath a stern expression. "You forgot to bring tea leaves," she scolded. "I brought something better," he replied, handing her the cloth bundle. She opened it. Inside was not just his sword. But Kurata's as well. 2 blades, bound together. Retired. At last. The years passed like wind through pine. Quietly, then completely. In the end, it was not battle or sickness that came for Kaito Masanobu, but the slow, dignified fading of a candle allowed to burn to its natural end. His hair thinned. His steps shortened. But his voice remained strong, even as winter settled in his bones. The school continued to thrive. It had grown from a quiet academy into a respected institution. Tsuyosa no Kyoku, the strength of memory school, now educated both boys and girls. Its students came from every province. Many were sons and daughters of former samurai. Others were the children of merchants, farmers, soldiers. Masanobu taught them all the same. Not to fight. To remember. To think. To ask. To carry the weight of history without letting it crush them. He was 73 when he began writing his final work. The manuscript was called The Shape of a Sword, Reflections on Duty in a Changing Nation. It was not published. Not in his lifetime. He insisted it be sealed, to be opened 100 years after his death. It is not meant for the present, he told Masao, who transcribed every line. It is for a time when memory has become too convenient. When even silence becomes a weapon. He poured everything into its pages. The truth of the shogunate's fall. The complexities of Seigo's rebellion. The futility of pride untempered by wisdom. The cost of obedience. And the unbearable, beautiful burden of survival. On the day he passed, the cherry tree was in bloom. He had risen early, walked once around the school grounds with his cane, and stopped to watch the students recite poems beneath the blossoms. He spoke to them. Not a lecture. A single sentence. Remember that silence is not peace. Then he returned to his room, where Masao waited with tea. He sat. Took her hand. And breathed his last. No struggle. Just stillness. Like a sword finally laid to rest. He was buried beneath the cherry tree, as he had requested. His students carried his coffin by hand. Masao placed the two swords, his and Kurata's, side by side in the stone chest beneath him. The school continued. And so did the whispers. Some say his final book was burned. Others say it vanished into a ministry archive. But 100 years later, in the archives of a national museum in Tokyo, a sealed bundle was found. Inside. The shape of a sword. Its opening lines read. If you are reading this, it means I am long gone. But the questions remain. Who were we, those who carried swords and then laid them down? We were not relics. We were bridges. You walk upon us now. So walk with care. And on a quiet spring morning in Akizuki, a young woman, the newest headmistress of Tsuyosa no Kyoku, stood beneath the same cherry tree. She held the book in one hand. And a single fallen blossom in the other. Behind her, the children recited a poem. And in that moment, in the hush between words, Kaito Masanobu lived again. Not in sword. Not in stone. But in memory. Forever carried. The end. Would you like a compiled version of the full 20-section story formatted like a novel? Or thumbnail and image prompts based on this final section? The winter of Masanobu's final years arrived not with pain, but with softness. Age did not strike him as a blow. It folded itself into his bones like a familiar companion. His hands, once firm around a sword hilt, now trembled gently as they held a brush. His hair, once black as lacquer, turned to snow. His knees cracked when he bowed, but still he bowed, every morning, before the kamidana in his study, and before the stone where two swords slept beneath the cherry tree. He had outlived war. Outlived Seigo, Kurata, Otagawa, his own father, and the 1,000 rituals of the old world. What remained of the samurai class had scattered into bureaucracies and merchant houses, their blades sold, hidden, or displayed as curiosities in European drawing rooms. The bushido he once bled for had become a metaphor, a concept marketed to foreigners or used by politicians to speak of spirit while emptying it of meaning. Masanobu watched this, and did not rage. He wrote instead. He began the manuscript quietly. At first, it was only scattered notes, a line in the margins of a textbook, a memory that clawed its way into consciousness at midnight. But over the course of 2 winters, it became something larger. The shape of a sword, reflections on duty in a changing nation. Each morning, Miseo would bring tea and a fresh scroll, and sit beside him as he dictated. Sometimes, he would speak for hours, as if exorcising something. Other days, he would pause after a single sentence and stare into the courtyard, lost in a reverie she dared not disturb. He wrote of everything. Of Shiroyama, not as legend, but as failure and devotion. Of Kurata's last decision to bury his sword. Of Miseo, and her quiet defiance, her strength in never needing to carry a blade to fight for something sacred. Of his father's stern lessons, and the cold moment when he realized they no longer applied to the world that followed. And above all, of the burden of surviving when others became martyrs. Dying for something is simple, he wrote. Living with the aftermath, tending the garden of grief, resisting the pull of rage, and guiding others away from ruin, that is the harder courage. He included names. Dates. Locations of graves left unmarked by the Meiji government. He detailed conversations with government ministers, with rebels, with young students who had grown up never holding a sword but still asking what honor meant. He wrote not to preserve the old code, but to question it, to illuminate it, to separate its wisdom from its chains. And he insisted the manuscript be sealed for a century. The present is not ready, he told Miseo. But a time will come when Japan will forget. And then it will need to remember. The last spring. He taught until the very end. Even when his voice cracked, he would sit among the students in the open air, letting their questions guide him. Why didn't you lead another rebellion, sensei? Because rebellion is a fire. You cannot warm a village with it without burning the house. Did you regret surviving Shiroyama? Some days. But not anymore. Do you still believe in Bushido? Not the old one. But I believe in its seed. Buried, not dead. On his final walk around the school, he paused beneath the cherry tree now grown wide and tall, its blossoms shimmering like ghost lanterns above him. He turned to the children and smiled. Remember this, silence is not peace. And memory is not mourning. It is a kind of resistance. Then he returned to his room. Sat down beside Miseo. Took her hand. And slipped, gently, into the next world. The funeral and burial. The entire town of Akizuki came to the funeral. Officials from Tokyo. Former students now judges, poets, professors. Children he had once taught, now parents. Strangers who had only read his name in obscure essays on the last generation of true samurai. He was buried beneath the cherry tree, as he had requested. Miseo placed 2 objects in the stone chest beside him. His katana, worn but unbroken. Kurata's sword, wrapped in the old rebellion banner, folded into a pillow of peace. No monument was erected. Only a simple stone with the inscription. Kaito Masanobu. He did not kill for truth. He waited long enough to teach it. 100 years later. The Meiji era became the Taisho. Then Showa. Then Heisei. New wars came. New ideologies burned. And yet the manuscript remained. It passed quietly from archive to archive, mostly unread, its contents classified, irrelevant, forgotten. Until one day, during a digitization project, a historian named Mika Tanaka opened the bundle with gloved hands and read the first sentence. She did not finish the scroll in one sitting. She read it slowly, over days. Sometimes in tears. Sometimes in awe. It was not a memoir. It was a sword, forged of ink and honesty. And when it was published at last, under the name The Shape of a Sword, it sparked a national discussion. Television programs. School curriculum debates. New translations of the Boshin War era. Re-examinations of Bushido. Even political leaders cited it in speeches, clumsily and often out of context. But among those who truly read it, something stirred. An understanding that history is not the story of those who won. It is the echo of those who chose to survive with purpose. Legacy. Back in Akizuki, the school still stood. Now a museum and learning center, its walls bore paintings and calligraphy from every era since Masanobu's death. Children walked through its halls holding tablets and listening to recordings of his teachings, his voice carefully preserved from old wax cylinders. The cherry tree still bloomed. And beneath it, each spring, a new teacher would gather the children and read aloud the closing lines of his book. I do not fear being forgotten. I fear a world that forgets what it is to question. I do not fear that swords are gone. I fear we will stop sharpening our minds in their place. And so ends the story of Kaito Masanobu. He was never emperor. Never shogun. Never statue. But his name endures not in the stone of shrines, but in the breath between questions. In the pause before action. In the silence where memory waits.